Welcome to Against the Current, a podcast created to give public and private sector leaders, both current and emerging, as well as advocates and cultural voices, a platform to share their perspectives with candor and conviction. Each episode goes beyond talking points to uncover the real stories, challenges, and lessons shaping today's most important causes. These conversations connect directly to decision makers, donors, and supporters who want to understand not just what an organization does, but why it matters. You'll hear how faith guides leadership, how conviction drives action, and how bold ideas are shaping the future of freedom and culture, both here at home and around the world. Here is your host, Matt Waters.
Wayne Morrow, the executive director and/or president of the John Birch Society. I'm glad that you're with me. Wayne, thanks for joining me. You are our very first guest, and that probably says maybe as much about what we do here and where we stand on the current debates.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, it started in the bottom, huh?
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. I don't know. There's a resurgence happening. And, Wayne, so look, but before we go there, let's talk about you for a moment. Wayne Morrow, you are the, I guess, executive director and/or president, the CEO, the head honcho of the John Birch.
Yeah, I have a president named Bill Jasper as the president, so he runs around like me, doing lots of presentations here or there. But
Yeah, so thank you for joining us. And your background, you have a healthcare kind of background, and you're newly appointed CEO over at John Birch Society. You've been there, what, about a year, maybe even under a year?
almost a year, but next and end of November, end of this month will be about a year. Yes.
That's terrific. Well, for folks who don't know, I mean, John Birch Society started in 1958, I believe, almost 70, 67, 68 years ago. For those younger viewers who may not have heard of the John Birch Society or don't know much about it, why don't you give me a quick intro and them a quick intro about John Birch? Why did you start? Who John Birch is, and let's go there. So, how did you start? How did you guys start?
Mr. Welch was a candy manufacturer.
Well, let's back up. Mr. Welch is not John Birch, though.
No, but he was he started the organization.
Yeah, Robert Welch.
Robert Welch did, and he saw in the world his studies there was something radically going on wrong, and so with that in mind, a lot of thinking came up with the name John Birch. And you say, why is that? Well, John Birch was a military intelligence officer during the war. He was killed in China at the close of World War II by the Communist Chinese. But he started off as a Christian missionary from Macon, Georgia, and his goal was to witness for the Lord in remote areas of China. That's what he did. And the only reason why he had got involved in military or anything is because he could speak the language, and General Doolittle was actually shot down over enemy territory, and the Chinese came to the Americans and said, hey, there is an American up in the mountains who can navigate your way out of danger, and his name is, John Birch. And so that's how he met them, and they used him as an intelligence officer because he could speak the language as they fought the war. And so he said, look, here's a man who really was the first one who died for World War III. He's the first casualty. And by the way, they buried his death and his whole surrounding behind his death, and it was locked up for many years. And they couldn't find out exactly why he died. So Mr. Welch took his mom and dad and actually walked to the halls of Congress trying to figure out, how did your son really die? So he said, what a noble man to take as a namesake, as a Christian missionary, Baptist Christian missionary, as our namesake, a man who fought for the Lord but also for freedom and died innocently, was killed by the communists. So Mr. Welch then expanded his research and had to give a 2-day presentation in Indianapolis in 1958 with about maybe 11 or so key industry leaders he knew. Say, hey, look, we're in problem, and we have this conspiracy in these inner workings of governments trying to destroy America. Matter of fact, we know it's Luciferian, we know it's satanic, There's no other name for it, and that's the genesis of how Mr. Welch started his organization.
And today, and we're gonna fast forward, nearly 70 years to today, and the relevancy of you today, and who's talking about you today. Not just the folks, on the left who are still bashing you, who are still coming at you, which to me, when you're hot over the target and taking flack, that's probably a badge of honor, especially coming from the New York Times, et cetera. But let's do this. How about we go to, let's go through the history. I mean, a lot of people have not heard about the John Birch Society. Why, Wayne? What happened in the 60s or 70s that while you just used a word called conspiracy. I like it. You guys are kind of the first conspiracy theorists, sort of. You use that word. The word is found in the Bible, by the way. I was just reading, I think, in King about the conspiracy to kill a king, etc. Um, so that's not a new word, but you guys mainstreamed it back in the 50s and 60s, and you paid a heavy price for it. What tell viewers about that?
Yeah, so, as we became popular with the term exposing the various people in government, and so did, by the way, other people seeing that, but Mr. Welch was very vocal about it, and he was under attack, and I had a conversation this morning with an individual in our office here. What happened was Mr. Welch ended up writing books and giving talks around the United States, and he wrote a book, which really started him off, the book is called The Politician, about Dwight Eisenhower. And he said, this is my book, and I have a manuscript. I'm going to pass around 6 copies of it, but it's really going to be published by me." And it was pretty hot. It's yay thick. It's a pretty thick book. Had a lot of references. And he said, "I think he was a willful dupe of the conspiracy used by them, as a conspirators use communism as a tool." Right. And so he took a lot of flack. And of course, Bill Buckley, who actually he befriended Bill Buckley. He helped him start his magazine, by the way, back then. And as a matter of fact, I think it was several thousands of dollars Mr. Welch got him in the business of promoting his magazine.
So Bill Buckley, for viewers who might not know, Bill Buckley, William F. Buckley, he wrote God and Man at Yale. He came out with the magazine National Review, and a Catholic, which I think played into this somewhat, but he became sort of the arbiter of who was conservative and who was not. And we're having that debate like in the last 1 second, right? Like right now in the conservative movement. But go on, keep going.
So anyway, Bill Buckley, was a hired hatchet man. He was a Skull and Bones, Yale-y, the whole bit. Actually, went against Mr. Welch and said, "You guys are really wackadoodles. You're conspiratorial. That doesn't exist. You guys are just fringy." And then the attack came from People's World, which is a communist newspaper, and then Time Magazine picked it up. Can you imagine? Why would People World talk about communists? Well, they were a communist newspaper. So that started the problem. And then, of course, Nelson Rockefeller at the National Convention for the Republican Party back in the 60s said, and he actually called out the Birch Society, "We're not going to have these fringe groups." And the John Birch Society, then they put us involved with the KKK and all these crazy people, which is totally uncalled for. And so that's how and they did a great job giving Mr. Welch and the organization a bad name, like crazy people, tinfoil hat crazies, because they didn't want them to know. Now, going back one step, Matt, in their genius activities, they control the media. So the only time you heard was negative news about the Birch Society. And so we worked hard to say, no, we're not lunatics, we're not fascists, we're not communists. And then Mr. Welch, shortly after that, asked for congressional investigation of the Birch Society. And as a matter of fact, I guess there was a group out in California.
So wait, Mr. Welch wanted to investigate his own organization. He called for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he wanted to correct our name. Absolutely, he did. Oh yeah, it's called the California Report. I'll send you a PDF of this later, Matt. And the California Report was a report, 2 years of investigations in the Birch Society. They came into our offices in San Marino, California, and Belmont, Massachusetts. They actually attended chapter meetings, talked to chapter leaders, talked to members for 2 years. You know what they found out? Hey, you guys are pretty good. You love your country. You're not crazy. And we understand what you're doing. So Mr. Welch says, "Can we put this in the public record?" No, 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 it's okay. Well, it's all fine. They couldn't find anything, so we republished their findings called the California Report, and we did that in late '60s. It's available. I'll send it to you in PDF. And it says, "No, we couldn't find anything wrong with you people." So then what happens then, Matt, the next story is, then we went into the silent mode, and then all of a sudden, they give us no attention at all. So now you hear, "You guys still around?" You know, because we had the silence treatment. That's what happened.
Well, it's interesting because there's two things you touched on initially. You talked about the word, you used the word conspiracy, right? And I could tell viewers kind of how I came into you guys. I literally bumped into you guys at a it was the Conservative Political Action Conference in Maryland at the time. This is probably 15 years ago. Somehow you were invited back to the Conservative Political Action Conference that year. You guys came in, and I bought a book called Shadows of Power and read the book and thought, wow, this is fantastic. And it aligned with, certainly my America First view. It's kind of the paleo-conservative, so you, in the right, I would frankly put you as you're constitutionalist, you kind of in paleo-conservative, but before we go there too, you use the word conspiracy, but you also use the word censor. You guys, I mean, long before Joe Biden came to office and told Google and Twitter and others to censor, you guys were censored, deplatformed, doxxed. You went through all of this years ago, long before, and even by your quote unquote friends, right? It was the so-called right wingers who threw you guys out of the party. And so what? So let me go back to this. Let me stay back on the book, The Politician. That was the real catalyst, right? That was the book in which I've got a copy somewhere around here. But the most objectionable thing that Buckley and others thought was the idea that Eisenhower was a communist, or at least a soft communist. Which you're talking about the Allied commander of World War II. You're talking about a two-term Republican president. What was, you know, and I don't remember, but I tend to recall that the issue was Eisenhower basically selling out Eastern Europe to the communists. And he basically enslaved 70 million people to Stalin and all the rest of that, which is not, I mean, we didn't take over Europe. We didn't take over France and Germany and become states of the American Republic, but we allowed the Soviets to do that. That to me was the biggest and rightful criticism of Eisenhower. Uh, and then there was also kind of the interesting thing that his promotions he was kind of this Manchurian candidate and got these, it was an odd thing how he got these promotions, almost like Barack Obama, right? It was like, where does this guy come from? And how did he get these promotions? And how did he end up becoming the president? And very similar story, which gets to Barack Obama and or Eisenhower on their own merit. There are questions to be raised. Anything on that? Anything you'd say, add to that or subtract or?
Well, no, I would say that Mr. Welch didn't call Eisenhower a communist. He said he's a willful dupe of a communist. I would consider him a neocon of the past. He was the first neocon. And you're right, he did sell out, Russian freedom fighters, Operation Keyhole, and he knew they were all going to be, and those guys committed suicide before they went over to Russia because they know they'd be enslaved. He knew that was going to happen. He knew that. So there were things in the book that he details, but he just called them out like, hey, there's a problem here. And that's why he wanted to print the book on his own and not tarnish the Birch Society, because he was going to take a lot of flack. And that's all they needed.
Well, in the movement, right? I mean, in '54, right around the time of Buckley coming into becoming the godfather of the movement, so to speak.
It was in the 60s. Yeah.
In the '60s, I think we could say that Buckley was a neocon.
Well, yeah, I would say so.
He had those leanings. I mean, he wasn't an American firster, I don't think. So you guys stay rooted to the Constitution. That's kind of your wheelhouse. So I was just for fun, Wayne, in prep for this. I went to, I forget which AI I checked. I don't know if it was Grok or Google or Chat, what have you. But put in, what are the organizations, the constitutional American first organizations in the country that if you're looking for them, who do you associate with? And you were number 2 on the list. John Birch Society. And I can't remember. I think it was like American First Policy Institute may have been number one, which is an offshoot of the Trump stuff down in Florida. And I thought it was interesting that you guys are still there. And there was also actually, to show your relevancy, there was a book called The Birchers published just a few years ago. Again, another, take it, you guys. What do you attribute your long lasting 67 years? I mean, you guys have been under the radar, but you're getting. We're going to come to where you are today. But for a long time under the radar, you have group meetings, chapter meetings. You publish a magazine. You have a congressional scorecard where you score every member of a state house and a state senate in every single state. I mean, that's nobody else is doing that. You want to talk about that?
Yes. Well, I go back to what you're saying. Our goal is to really educate organized citizens. Yes, we're constitutional moderates. Going back to labels, people call you far right. If you look at the political spectrum, far right is anarchy, no government. Far left is total government. You have all your isms: communism, fascism, socialism, Nazism. And we're sort of in the center, called constitutional moderate. Some form of government, but not total. I just go back one story you mentioned about Eisenhower and Joseph Stalin, and that going back to John Birch was murdered by the communist Chinese. The reason why it never got out, because we never would have funded the Chinese movement, the agrarian reformer, Mao Zedong. But here's the story. What Mr. Welch wrote a book, Again, May God Forgive Us. It's a book he wrote back in the 60s. It talks about Mao Zedong was installed in power by Joseph Stalin. That's how he came into that. So it was a satellite of the communists, but Stalin installed Mao Zedong, and that's how he shows up. It wasn't like all of a sudden he showed up on a farmland one day in a rice field. No, that's not true. So that's the beginning. So Mr. Welch pointed his finger out. Hey, these people are orchestrating this tool called socialism and communism to form world government, to destroy, because we know it was satanic in his being. Now, fast forward to where we are today, is that how do you measure this? And so we want to elect constitutional-minded representatives. You mentioned the Freedom Index. Yes, on our website, at thenewamerican.com, we have a banner top called the Freedom Index. And every 6 months or so, we take 6 constitutional bills and we rank them down with stars. It goes from 0 to 100%. And you know how you folks vote. Every state legislator, Senate and House, as well as the U.S. Congress. And we find out how people vote. Now, here's the scary part about this. Why do we do this? Is it because we're trying to waken people up, and that these representatives that we have are sort of uphold the Constitution? And that's a pretty easy fix. But what I'm finding out, Matt, which is what we do all the time, is that most of our Americans are not taught American civics any longer. And so I asked this question: could you please, I don't care what city, what group, Republican, Tea Party, you pick it, church groups, when was the last time you actually read the U.S. Constitution? About 1 to 4% raised their hand. I said, how many people have read the state constitution? The answer is usually 0. So now the question, Matt, to all your listeners is, then how do you base your election on? How do you hold people accountable if you don't know the rule book? How do you do this? So it becomes a Valentine's card. Boy, he's handsome. Boy, she's beautiful. Hey, that was a good joke. Well, that's not who you have. So that's what we have today. We have politicians. We have a few constitutionalists upholding the Constitution, and they get made fun of, like Tom Massey, right? But the thing is that we've been doing this all along, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so let's go there. So I want to go right to we'll share. We will link some of the things you're sharing if we can link to the public on some of these documents. But and then your promotional video, which you sent me, is very good. It's about 4.5 minutes. We'll either put it at the beginning or middle of the show or somewhere in the show notes. But that video starts with a congressman who was elected out of Houston, Texas, by the name of Ron Paul. Ron Paul is giving you accolades. In the video, let's stop there a minute. So Ron Paul comes on in the 70s. He has a break with Ronald Reagan as a congressman because Ronald Reagan didn't cut the government enough, and He talked about limited government, and I don't think Reagan in 2 terms cut one program. He actually may have cut one program, and I've heard about this from a friend who worked with Reagan. It was his program that was cut, and it consisted of like 2 or 3 employees, and that's what Reagan cut in 8 years. And Paul, seeing this, got fed up and walks away. Um, and honestly, Paul was part of my journey, so many people's journey, right? Back into the movement of, and even in changing the movement to some degree, where he comes in as a Tea Party conservative and, really wants to restrain the government. He runs for president. He's laughed off the stage by Marco Rubio and Rudy Giuliani, who say, hey, this guy's just unrealistic. He wants to shrink the budget. He doesn't want to be involved overseas. Kind of the George Washington farewell address kind of stuff, right? Like, hey, we want to be friends with everybody. No enemies here. And, that's kind of won the day right now. I mean, I think you fast forward 2 presidential runs for Ron Paul. He writes a book called Revolution. He calls for an end of the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, one of the books you first published, the Jekyll Island book, the
Creature from Jekyll Island. Yep.
Creature from Jekyll Island, about the beginning of the Federal Reserve and how wrong that was. You guys called it out, years ago. So Paul is kind of back in vogue, but he starts the video, your promotional video. Then you move to people today on the stage of, a Steve Bannon and an Alex Jones giving you guys accolades. Now, by the way, those 3 and some others in there really kind of position you in the movement that's happening in the last, I jokingly say 25 seconds, but this movement about Israel, anti-Semitism, your positions on, foreign aid, that sort of thing. So, a lot of people like, the Tuckers and others who are saying, hey, why do we have such influence in the federal government? Well, that, of course, there's the Israeli lobby and all that sort of thing. And then there's so there's a real question here, right? And so you got a divide clearly happening right now. Where's Birch on this? Where are you all on the, I won't call it the Jewish question, but on, Israel, and foreign aid? Tell people, what say you?
Well, that's a lot of information. I would say, I would say constitutionally, we're against foreign entanglements. We're warned against that because you never can win. You always have enemies, no matter what side you take. So, like, regardless if it's Israel, Germany, it doesn't make a difference. No foreign entanglements. None of our business. That's it. End of story. And we're not the world policeman. That's not our goal. Ours is, I don't mean isolationism. I mean foreign entanglements. Why get involved in things? And by the way, if we have an issue with one country, then we deal with one country. So that's why Mr. Welch said, hey, we got to get out of the United Nations. That's the world government head. And by the way, that's another major program we've been doing in the 60s. Get us out of the UN, because we knew it was formed by Alger Hiss and another communist. And there's another communist, because we knew it was all run by communists. And they needed a world head. That's the UN. So the UN fosters a lot of wars. You mentioned about war and aid through the UN and the Blue Helmets. And by the way, Korean War and the Vietnam War were not wars by American soldiers. They were under the UN command. You know that? They were not under the U.S. command. And as well as Afghanistan is all UN command. You know that?
The Korean War, you go to the War Memorial in Washington, and it's funny. I asked the park ranger there, I said, hey, excuse me, but I don't think we ever declared war in Korea. It was a conflict. So the idea that it says the Korean War Memorial is A, wrong, and B, I don't think it's actually officially ended yet. I don't think we've actually officially ended the war in Korea.
But it's a good point, Matt, because it was called a conflict on purpose by the UN because it was Blue Helmet Day as well as the Vietnam War. And NATO is part of the UN, That's all part of the thing. So Mr. Welch called these people out on that. And in the Birchers Society, we took a lot of flack because Steve Bannon, Alex Jones says, hey, you guys have been right all along. So history has proved us correct. Now it's like, now we're in vogue. So now you go on YouTubers and all, they take our information, they call it their own. Hey, you conspiracy people, yeah, well, okay, now we're real popular because history is saying, geez, you guys have been right all along. So it gives us a lot of credibility. So the silent treatment kind of comes and goes a little bit. We get attacked now and then, but they know it's not working. So now they still ignore us for a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think that posture is the best posture, right? I mean, it's the Ron Paul posture. It's the posture of peace. And unfortunately, maybe you can speak to this. I mean, our economy. I heard someone say that we have a pretty good military and a decent retirement system, and that's sort of what the federal government's all about. When you look at the budget, right? You look at the entitlements, which are and they are true. Right? We've put into Social Security, we pull out of Social Security. We put into Medicare, we take out, we get Medicare. So those are earned benefits. I get that, but then you have a military budget, right? So those two make up the most of our budget, except for now we've got spending that we have to pay back money
Interest on the debt's pretty high right now.
just off the to the Chinese, right? So so you've got that, but yeah, so you've got this big, massive military industrial complex that actually has to stay somewhat busy in order to keep the economy going. There's a reason why the F-14 is built in 435 congressional districts, right? That program's never going to be cut, never. And so, so let's go back to you have chapter meetings. So people want to get plugged into you all. They can go to your website. They can join your organization, receive a card, and start begin to receive your New American magazine, which is very well written. And so talk about the New American and your local meetings and kind of how do people plug in?
Right. So that's important. So now you know the problem. Now what? So I identified one. People don't know who we are on purpose because the Department of Education doesn't want to teach Americans any longer. That's part of the rules. We don't want you to know who you are, right? So we have local chapter meetings because we believe in grassroots. Our job is to get local involvement in the process, teaching people Americanism, sharing information with their friends and neighbors, to get involved in the political process, that is, voting for constitutional minority representatives at the state level, local level, as well as the federal level. And how do you do that? You have to know who we are, what is our genesis. You have to know this, right? And you have to identify who your enemies are, right? And we have to expose them. So local meetings, we have basically all education, which is an activity, and we distribute people's scorecards and how they vote and question a representative. Hey, Matt, you're our congressman. Could you tell us why you voted against the Constitution in this instance? Could you help to do this? So politicians, we find out, have an answer. Either they know they're being inspected, they want to keep their job. Either they change their behavior and say, you're right, or I've been bought off, I'm a crony, and they get taken out of office because now more people know what's going on. It's all about education. Mr. Welch says the left does education. We need to educate as well. And so that's our whole goal, is education over politics. But you have to know who we are. And the sad part about it is, Matt, the educational system has personally dumbed down Americans, not knowing what they are. So they know more about SEC football scores and stats than about the Constitution of the United States. I know this for a fact because I live in the South, right?
Yeah, no, I did years in Dixie. Now you're in Georgia, right?
Yes, I am. But can you imagine they don't know about SEC football. So can you stop 2 minutes? We talk about our country. And I think once people now see, you mentioned the Federal Reserve, once they see how we're being raped and pillaged mentally and fiscally, then they say, look, we have to get involved. So bring it up to speed today is I'm fighting the era of complacency. And I have to fight that. And and I think we're under psychological warfare for many years. And that's what I'm fighting right now. And we have elections today, as a matter of fact. I was on television this morning about the elections going on in New York City. Can you imagine a Marxist running for mayor? Like, my goodness. I mean, but that's all due to the fact of non-educated folks. We have to make people aware, understand first of all who we are, what the problem is, and the genesis of it all to give us credibility. We have lots and lots of materials. You mentioned the magazine, the New American magazine comes out every month. We talk about current events and historical events, how we tie it all together, see, and how it all works together. But the key thing, Matt, is to get people involved in the process. You can't sit at home and look out the window with your wife and say, We have a constitutional-minded representative with high ethics. His name is Matt Waters, and he's going to be our congressman. He appeared out of nowhere. The answer, that's not going to happen. You got and they want that to happen. They don't want it to involve, but they have to be involved.
The magazine you mentioned, my favorite section is the historical perspective piece. I think that's fascinating. I mean, give a quick review of that. What is that about? So you have the
So we have to, we go back in time about the Pearl Harbor, how that all started. That was all cobbed up for a reason. The Federal Reserve, the history behind the Federal Reserve. We took maybe a character in the past or a president, McKinley or whatever it may be. And we just talked about their history and how they were there. And most people have no idea. Dostoevsky was one once about how he warned against those forms of government. And we have one now, a book that I'm really excited about. And I think it's worth a minute to tell you about this. It's called The Fabians. So I was in a meeting in Liberty University not long ago, and the past Prime Minister, Liz Truss, gave a speech. And I came up to her on stage and said, by the way, yes, I know the UK. I used to live in the UK and work there as a president of a company. I said, you never mentioned the Fabians. The Fabians are purposely destroying your country. The Prime Minister's a Fabian, so is the Mayor of London. She looked at me with her eyes like this. I go, I know we have this book called The Fabian Freeway. So I sent her a PDF and a hard copy. I'll give you 1 minute story behind the Fabians, right? Okay, so back in the day, Lord Milner and Cecil Rhodes got some money from the Rothschilds, and they said, we need to form this group from the Illuminati days, and we'll call it the Fabians. That's the genesis of the Fabians of Lord Milner. With the Octavius Fabius is a general who actually was very patient to overcome his enemy. That's why they took the word Fabian. So there was a man writing all the time. So Aldous Huxley, Bertrand Russell were Fabians. Tony Blair's actually a member as well. Writing this all down, the storyline, the genesis of the Fabians. And he decided, this is so cool, I'm going to write a book about this. And he said, well, I don't want to use my name because I think I'm crazy. I'll come up with a pen name. He said, my son's name is George, and I have a town nearby, a river called Orwell, so I'll give myself George Orwell. And I'll write this book under George Orwell, and I'll call it 1984. And it talks about the Fabians in world government. Now, the question becomes to people, I says, why was it 1984? It's because the Fabians started in 1884. They said it was 100 years they'd have world government. That's why it's called 1984. And so you read the book, inside the first cover, it says, my real name is Eric Blair. He talks about his genesis, but he had to write about, he couldn't wait, he had to tell about the whole story about Orwellian, about Big Brother. That's all about what we see today. And so the Fabians, right, formed a group called the Chatham House. They formed the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. Now the power source moved from London to New York City. So now you have the Council on Foreign Relations. You remember the Shadows of Power, really important. And you ought to get the book, The Fabian Freeway, Matt, because it talks about these two organizations working together on the world government scene. Okay? So you see, that's your conspiracy. It's a plan happening. So we're proving through history, this isn't all make-believe. We connect dots.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's what sets you apart from so much of the noise online, right? And there is legitimate misinformation online today. I'll get something on the right and on the left, and you check it with Snopes or whatever. Like, is this really true? But when you guys send something out, it's thoroughly researched, and people may come to a different conclusion. But I think honestly, if you have an open mind on this and just read the literature, it's hard. It's almost, the conclusions are nearly inescapable. I mean, your work on the Oklahoma City bombing, for example, fascinating. I mean, there's just too many questions here. And Tucker's just done this with his miniseries on 911. A lot of questions on 911 that are not answered. He doesn't go full on, false flag, but he certainly raises a lot of questions. And you mentioned, just in passing, you just dropped an atomic bomb, Wayne, which was Pearl Harbor. And you read the history of Pearl Harbor, and you start to see, well, wait a minute, FDR did know. He egged the Japanese on, and he ignored the multiple warning signals coming in to get us into World War II, and was willing to sacrifice 3,700 men.
Can you imagine how evil that is? And same story, Matt, with Lusitania, get us in World War One. That was the same deal.
Or Vietnam, right? Or Vietnam, we it was all fake, and so let me go to and this is kind of where I go.
You sound like a Bircher, Matt.
Yeah, no, I mean the crazy thing is, and we all are Birchers today,
Well, we should be, right?
knowingly or unknowingly. I funny thing you mentioned this. I've got a friend of mine in Alabama I see occasionally, and I asked her. I said, well. She was talking about this is during the COVID stuff, the vax, WTO, World Health, WHO, World Health Organization, all the stuff, right? Bill Gates, all the things. And I said, well, where are you on? She said, well, I'm, opposed. And I went down the list, 911, Vietnam. Oh, she checked Kennedy assassination. You guys have done a lot of work on the Kennedy assassination too. But, so when our serious question, our government, I don't think there can be any question that we have a shadow government within the confines of our existing government. We call it a deep state, right? We've used that term, and others who are not, wouldn't call themselves Birchers, but Tim Weiner's book, The History of the CIA, The Legacy of Ashes, for example. Here's a liberal who basically looks at these classified documents of the CIA, that are now unclassified, and puts together a tome of, 500 pages. And in the first 10 pages, you realize the CIA may be the most dangerous organization on the face of the earth. And that's our government, right? And we know that Trump has unleashed the CIA to go work out in Venezuela right now, to overthrow a government. We overthrew the Shah of Iran, which created a lot of Middle East problems, I believe. So you sit back and think, well, who's really running the government? And then you get thinking questions like, was the election legitimate? When the CIA under Richard Nixon was overthrowing elections globally. He said, yeah, just go overthrow. If you can overthrow elections in other countries, you can certainly overthrow an election in this country. That's what they do. That's literally what they do, right? So to ask the question and to be shut down, but you guys have asked the question. So to me, Wayne, you've done this, you've been involved in right of center, I'll call it generously, right of center politics. What is the biggest threat in your mind facing America today? What would you say maybe the one or two biggest threats that we face today?
Psychological warfare, indoctrination. That's what we fight. They can't see truth any longer. They've been so brainwashed they can't see it. American people can't see it. And I'll tell you about the Europeans in a minute because I had a conversation with them because we are going to Europe with our messaging in South America. But the Americans can't see it they can't hold it in front of their face. And we've known that was part of the game, psychological warfare. That was really part of the deal. Yuri Bezmenov, who was interviewed by Ed a long time ago, Ed Griffin, you could see it on YouTube, Yuri Bezmenov and Ed Griffin interview, he said that's psychological warfare he calls about the Russians or the communists, but KGB. He knows how effective that was. He talked about that and how that was back in the 80s, yeah? And you would see the effects of it all. So we're fighting psychological warfare. He said you get to the point where you could take them to the gulag and show them that they won't believe there's a real happening. So that's number one.
Well, let me stop you there, Wayne. So the other thing about psychological warfare is this. We don't want to believe our own government assassinated a president, right? We don't want to believe our own government that was that. Right, more than one. We don't want to believe that our own government sent 3,700 men to their deaths in Pearl Harbor. We don't want to believe that, right? That's really hard to believe. If that is true, we have to sit back and think, okay, wait a minute. This is not America. This is not the country that I read about in, George Washington and the cherry tree, right? This is something very different.
Well, here's my mom feels the same way. So what happened is, I just want to make sure it's clear is that you mentioned the CIA and the federal government. Not everybody who works for the government or even the CFR are evil, bad people because the people on the very top have been compromised. The worker bees are still trying to do their job and they know this is wrong and they actually leak out, and they squeal and say this was going on. So they had a series of that going on. So I go to Europe. Let me fast forward and talk about it's a world problem, why we're going to the European market. So in Europe, we're in France and the Netherlands and now the UK. telling this is a global conspiracy hard at work. And so the question I ask is, what news source you get about the United States in Europe? It's CNN and the New York Times. Matt, that's what they read. That's what they hear. And I was at a conference last week in DC about independent media, and parts of that was Europe, and Netherlands. So without them, that there's a very small market now because they get censored now. That's what they get pumped into the soft heads of Europeans, CNN and the New York Times. Same thing here. Yeah, the pink paper. Yeah, the pink paper. Or now you go fast forward to the United States. Same deal with us. You get NBC, ABC, all the same news speaks. So you see, it's psychological warfare. We're pumping disinformation to your head. Now we call it the deep state, but they've been doing this for a long time. They're very clever people to make sure the messaging stays the same.
And the clever people are our deep state, the CIA, the NSA, who work at and staff Time Magazine, MSNBC, etc. And they're feeding the story.
Yes, they work for the conspirators. I guarantee you.
They work for the story, and they're feeding the line that Venezuela's really bad and we need to go bomb them. That Iran's really bad and we got to go bomb them. We've got to get involved. And honestly, they need to stay relevant. And the way they stay relevant is to continue to, as Ron Paul talked about, fear, fear, fear. You sell fear. That's what we do in an insurance company. Hey, you need fire insurance because your house might burn up and burn to the ground. You need us. It could happen at any moment. So there's this fear mongering, this orchestrated. I went to a big state school here in Virginia, and it's like every state school in the country, or they're all the same. And we studied, this is 35 years ago, the crisis of Watergate. And, the resignation and the crisis of the Vietnam War and how people were burning their draft cards. And Martin Luther King, we talked about his situation, of course, the Kennedy thing, and we got the party line. And I remember that it was, 8 months into George Bush's administration, not even 8, I forget what it was, not very long, but maybe 8, because it was September, that 9/11 happened, that 19 guys on 2 airplanes, I guess 3 airplanes, literally brought down a country of 350 million people. It stopped the country. I mean, grounded every airplane. And and then you had Bush, of course, was elected by hanging chads, and the Supreme Court voted. It was like a 5-4 decision. And now fast forward, 20 years past that, and you've got what we have today, where you've got a president was nearly assassinated. Charlie Kirk is assassinated. In fact, when I was with you all up at King of Prussia at your Leadership Institute a few weeks ago, it was 2 days after Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. And what was remarkable to me is you had a room full of patriots who, despite the bad news, despite the trouble, despite the censorship and the mocking all they people do with John Birch, they stood firm. They're getting educated. You had some great panels, and of course you alluded to this already. Your books that you're selling, the books that you're producing and putting out there, and so there is a remnant in America of patriots who are undeterred and remain very committed to our Constitution. And I think that's the silver lining. And that's the thing. You haven't gone anywhere. You've carried that group of people from 1958 to 2025, and you've got a great vision for the future, Wayne, as the president there. You shared that at the meeting.
Yeah, well, I think it's important because we have a moral responsibility to do this. You mentioned the word fear. That's a tool of the enemy. And of course, 2 Timothy 1:7 said, the Lord has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. So what is there to be fearful about? But to answer your question, people are fearful. It's psychological warfare. And when people are fearful, you're controllable. And now you're controllable. See, it's all psychological. They know this. And this is what they use worldwide, by the way, not just the United States. And I have a moral responsibility to tell people, hey, look, this is what's really going on. You have to do this. This is real. You have to wake up. Why hand your country, wherever you live, to the enemy? You don't have to do that. You have to take some initiative and responsibility to do this. And that's what we said education is key. It's critical. It's not bullets and posters and screaming and yelling. And once people with knowledge and understand that what they're up against, it's easily defeated with that knowledge. And they know this. That's why they keep on look here, look here, look here, look here, and never look at their problem. Oh, you don't want to look over here. That's not the problem. Yes, it is. And that's how easy it is. Just point to the problem. That's why we do the books, Matt, because it's not just us saying it. We want you to take a look at what other people have written to validate what our message is. And it's year after year after year, going back 30, 40, 50, 67 years, and history proved them right. That's why Steve Bannon and Alex Jones and Ron Paul said, you guys are the OGs, you're original, because you are the original gangsters. You actually showed what it was. And the answer is yes, history has proved us right.
Yeah, no question. That's great. Well, we can kind of wrap up here, but let me ask. I like to ask my guests this, Wayne. You're on. This is the deserted island book question. Which you're on a deserted island. Which book do you carry? And you can't say the Bible because we all carry the Bible. But beyond the Bible, what are the three books you carry? And not how to build a boat to get off the island, but what are the important books that have influenced you in this arena?
A book I read a long time ago called None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen, which is out of print. The Creature from Jekyll Island is really important. Talks about public enemy number one, the Federal Reserve. I look at that one. And the third one's very tough, but I would say The Law by Frederick Bastiat. Yeah, that kind of sets us tune about how we form our government. Whereas our Constitution, I don't have to say that our Constitution is really important to me, because it was written by godly men, not all godly men, but most of them who looked at the Lord, and you can see they imported biblical standards into our Constitution. And that's important. And what a valuable document. And imagine if it was written today, it'd be like 2,000 pages. But it's very simple. And that's why they said we're binding our government by the chains of the Constitution. And that's why they want to rewrite the Constitution. They hate it. It's not a living document. It's as is. It doesn't change. Just like our Lord's word never changes, right? And this is it. Just abide by the rule book. And if you're not taught by the rule book, Matt, you veer left and right. So that's why we go back to education. If you don't understand who we are and what our rule books are, how can you elect representatives to represent us in Congress to uphold the Constitution if you don't know what it is? So think about how crazy it is, but how clever that is. So what basis do I hire you and hold you accountable because you're handsome or cute? It doesn't work that way. So that's my goal. That's my answer to your question.
Yeah, and I've got the Atlantic magazine somewhere around here that the cover is literally an imprint of the United States Constitution and about how we need to change the Constitution. So the liberal argument right now is, and they understand that, what they have to do is they have to obliterate the Constitution in order to get their agenda through, or they're just going to do it via, what they're doing now.
Well, what they do, yeah, Matt, they do that with Bible too. They said, the 10 Commandments outdated. The earth was formed in Genesis 1 through 13 is not a cut. So I look at that. The Bible says 10 Commandments, not 10 suggestions. Just much like the Constitution, it's not suggestions. They're there for a good reason. If you look through the Federalist Papers, why it was written, because the people, even though they were agricultural and farmers and uneducated, they were much smarter than they were than today, because they actually talked about the constitutional principles and why we have such learned men back then with very little technology, but did some phenomenal things. It's embarrassing. So when I read what they've done with such little, with a candle and minimal food and kind of a poor living conditions, that crank out things unbelievable. What an embarrassment for us.
Right, right. Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, you go back and look at the literature. I think it's C.S. Lewis has said that for every one new book you read, you should be reading 3 books that are 100 years old or older. And I really buy that. I mean, I've just personally, the 1850s I think, are kind of maybe a high holy mark in humanity, what we did at that time. And what was, like you mentioned, Dostoevsky, who wrote a book called Demons in the 1860s, and he saw what communism coming, destruction of the family, destruction of the church, destruction of equality, all the rest. I mean, making everybody equal makes everybody unequal, right? And so it was really interesting, and he called it Demons and talked about the spiritual aspects of this. And that's where, we're here today. I mean, even, we're
How about that?
right, right. So nothing's changed since the Garden of Eden, right? I mean, there's forces of demonic forces happening, and so that gets into the realm of spirituality that we as in politics don't really go there. That's for the church to do, right? That's the church's work, is to instruct and educate people about biblical truth. I don't think we separate the two. I think we can talk about it, like even here. I think there's a place. We were a Christian country. We were founded on Christian principles, and I would call myself a Christian nationalist very easily. No, I have no issue with doing that. So, not to the exclusion of anyone. I mean, but we have to have the Ten Commandments. We have to have a basis in which we all agree, morality, right? And if you take that out, you have what we have right now, which is, as they said, judges, every man is living for himself. There is no rules, and that becomes a problem.
Yeah, and you look at the history of the Roman Empire, it fell that way. It was started as a republic, then a democracy, and the rule of the Caesars. That's what we see. They're shoving this. So to your point is, I tell people we're a republic, not a democracy. I get tired of that because we're not a democracy. We're a republic ruled by law, not by general rule. I mean, we're ruled by law, not by majority rule. That's really important. But if you look at history, they push you to chaos, anarchy, totalitarianism, and they do that on purpose. And you can see them pushing us further away for insurrection, civil war, disobedience, black versus white, man versus woman, young versus old. Always that conflict worldwide, not just the United States, to cause that divergence. So we kill each other and fight each other. Again, we know it's spiritual about. That's all by plan. So once people hear the story, now I make it easy. So let me tell you what's going on. They either accept it, they think about it, but I change their worldview. And it's hard for some people, Matt, to really understand that because I'm changing the world. Even their heroes are not heroes in my mind, but they need to know but they don't know any better. It's all back to education again. So every person has to understand themselves and come to that point. They have to understand, I've been had, let me undo this, and their ego has to be put aside and say, I really have to move forward. I don't want to be a slave. I want to be a free man, right? I want to own property. I want to be left alone. I want to raise my family in a moral society and do what they want to do as God leads. End of story. Pretty simple. And that's what we're fighting for.
Yeah. Well, there's so much more we could discuss, Wayne, and we'll have you back at some point. But I think this is a good introduction to John Birch and what you all are doing.
Yeah, now you get people to join. jbs.org, very inexpensive. We have all that information online, a lot of tools and videos. Our magazine, thenewamerican.com, which is once a month. And we also have a school called the Freedom Project Academy, which is an online school from K to 12th grade. And it's an online education live, or you can have it, recorded. So we have 3 phases, very important. We try, again, it's all about education. It's really important. That's the key. And I know we win in the end. Our job in the meantime is oppose evil and do good. And that's what I try to do every day.
Great, Wayne. Well, Wayne Morrow, the CEO of the John Birch Society, glad to have you. And we will, this will be on YouTube. We'll share this far and wide. And thank you for joining us. And we'll be in touch, Wayne. God bless you.
Okay. Well, we win in the end. No problem. Right, Matt? We win.
That's it. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, brother.
Amen. All right. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the time. Thank you. Bye.
Take care. You too. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Against the Current podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.